June 8, 1977, a warehouse in Miami, Florida. Not a factory, not an assembly line, a rented warehouse, hundreds of miles from where this story actually began. Inside, a small crew of tired men are bolting together the last truck they will ever build. There's no ceremony, no cameras, no executives giving speeches, just a handful of guys finishing a job that, weeks earlier, they thought they'd lost forever. The truck is a model Yusufin 162 TL. Under the hood, a growling Detroit diesel 12-cylinder engine, a 15-speed transmission. Rear axles rated to carry 55,000 pounds. It's headed overseas to Iran to spend the rest of its working life hauling sugarcane across a country most of these workers will never see. It doesn't know it's the last one, but it is, because the factory that was supposed to build it, the one that had been building trucks like it for 65 straight years, is already gone. Padlocked, silent, sitting empty in a small town in upstate New York that used to be proud to call itself home to the most rugged truck in the world. This is the story of Brockway, and like most stories about things that die too soon, it doesn't start with an ending. It starts with a horse. Go back almost exactly 100 years before that Miami warehouse, to 1875, to a quiet town called Homer, New York. A man named William Brockway opens a small shop, wagons, carriages, wheels. Nothing more ambitious than that. The automobile doesn't exist yet. Not in any form most people would recognize. William isn't building a legacy. He's just trying to make a living fixing wagons in a small New York town. He dies in 1889. The business passes to his son, George Brockway. And George does something his father could never have imagined. He starts paying attention to a strange new machine that's beginning to show up on American roads. The motorized truck. In 1909, George starts experimenting, using chassis supplied by a nearby company called Chase Motor. The earliest Brockway trucks are awkward, high-wheeled contraptions that barely resemble what we'd call a truck today. They look more like a wagon that swallowed an engine, but they work. And in 1912, George and his brother-in-law, Fred Thompson, lease a building in the neighboring town of Cortland, a space that used to belong to a horse-drawn cab company. They reorganize under a new name, Brockway Motor Trucks. It is, on the surface, a completely unremarkable beginning, a leased building, a handful of workers. No investors clamoring to get in. Nobody standing in that building in 1912 could have guessed that this small operation would define an entire town's identity for the next 65 years, or that its ending would become a symbol of something much bigger happening across all of industrial America. For a while, though, it just works. When World War I breaks out, the U.S. military needs dependable trucks, fast. Brockway wins a contract to build 587 Class B Liberty trucks for the war effort. It's the company's first real taste of large-scale production, and it proves something important. When it matters, Brockway trucks hold up after the war. The company expands its range, building trucks that carry anywhere from 1 ton to 5 tons, powered by heavy-duty Hercules 6-cylinder engines, putting out more than 200 horsepower, serious power for the era. By 1928, Brockway is confident enough to buy an entire other manufacturer outright, the Indiana Truck Corporation, based in Marion, Indiana. On paper, it looks like a small New York truck maker is quietly building an empire. But empires built too fast have a habit of cracking. And less than a year later, the entire American economy falls apart. The Great Depression doesn't just slow the auto industry down, it wipes most of it out. Dozens of American truck manufacturers, some far bigger and better funded than Brockway, simply ceased to exist during the 1930s. Brockway survives, barely, not by getting bigger, but by doing the opposite, staying small, staying specialized, building heavy-duty, custom-order trucks for buyers who want something built to spec, not something rolling off an anonymous assembly line. It's not glamorous, it's not fast growth, but it keeps the lights on in Cortland while so many competitors go dark for good. Then comes World War II, and with it, another surge in demand. When peace finally returns in 1946, Brockway posts one of the best years in company history. 4,212 trucks rolling out of the Cortland plant in a single year, nearly matching the record set decades earlier. For a moment, it feels like Brockway has made it, like the small company that survived the Depression is finally about to become a real player. It doesn't last. By 1954, just 8 years later, annual production has collapsed to 611 trucks, a 90% drop. The post-war boom is over. Competition from bigger manufacturers is brutal, and a small, independent family-descended truck maker in upstate New York is starting to look like an endangered species in an industry that's consolidating fast around it. Brockway's leadership knows they need a partner, and they know it urgently. They open talks with multiple companies, including White Motor Company and Continental Engine, quietly exploring mergers, alliances, anything that might keep the Cortland plant running. Several paths are on the table, several possible futures. They choose Mack. In August 1956, Mack Trucks, already one of the biggest, most respected names in the American trucking industry, takes control of Brockway through a lease purchase agreement worth roughly $3 million. By 1959, the full buyout is complete, $12 million, and Brockway now officially belongs to Mack. Here's the part that makes this different from a typical corporate swallowing up story. Mack doesn't shut Brockway down and absorb it into their own lineup. Instead, they let it keep operating almost independently, its own factory, its own workforce, its own customer base, its own identity. Mack gets a foothold in the specialized, heavy custom truck market it doesn't fully compete in. Brockway gets financial stability and access to Mack engineering. For the first time in years, the future in Cortland looks solid. And it's in this exact moment of renewed confidence that Brockway does something small, almost accidental, that ends up defining the entire brand forever. Mack's trucks have always carried a snarling bulldog on the hood. Fierce, unmistakable, one of the most recognizable logos in American industry. Brockway's management wants something of their own. Ideas get thrown around in meetings. Someone suggests a bull. It goes nowhere. Then a teenager speaks up. Jim Duncan, the son of a Brockway employee named Bill Duncan, has been watching a popular TV show called Sergeant Preston of the Yukon, about a Canadian Mountie and his loyal sled dog battling the frozen north. Jim suggests that Brockway should have a husky of its own. It's just a passing comment from a kid in the room, but somebody actually listens. In 1957, the Brockway Husky is born, a chrome sled dog mounted proudly on the radiator, first appearing on a model called the N260TL in 1958. 5 years later, for the company's 50th anniversary in 1962, they switched the chrome dog to gold. It becomes far more than a hood ornament. Drivers start calling their own trucks Huskies. The image ends up on jackets, belt buckles, coffee mugs, garage walls. In the brutal winters of the American Northeast, where these trucks are out plowing snow, hauling logs, grinding through blizzards on icy back roads, a sled dog on the hood just makes sense. It isn't marketing dreamed up by an ad agency in New York City. It's a nickname that grew organically out of a small town, and the company was smart enough to let it become the whole brand. Through the 1960s, Brockway keeps building on that momentum. In 1965, they roll out the 300 series, a hugely popular lineup that becomes a genuine workhorse across construction, logging, and heavy hauling. Buyers can spec their trucks with Cummins, Detroit Diesel, or Caterpillar engines, matched to the transmission and axle setup they actually need. Almost nothing comes off a generic template. These are, in the truest sense, hand-built machines. Then, in May 1968, Overdrive magazine, one of the most respected publications in American trucking, puts a Brockway on its cover and hands the company a title it will wear proudly for the rest of its existence, the most rugged truck in the world. Think about that for a second. A company that started as a small carriage repair shop in a town most Americans have never heard of, just got crowned the toughest truck on the planet by the industry's own press. It should feel like the peak. In a lot of ways it is. But here's the part nobody's celebrating out loud in 1968, even at this exact moment, at its proudest and most iconic. Brockway has never controlled more than about 0.2% of the entire U.S. truck market. 0.2%. Even wearing the crown of most rugged truck in the world. Brockway is, and always has been, a tiny company competing in an industry run by giants. And in the 1970s, the ground starts shifting violently under every small manufacturer left standing in America. In 1974, Brockway introduces what will turn out to be its final generation of trucks, the 700 series. It's the most modern truck the company has ever built. Buyers can choose the traditional Brockway butterfly hood, where each side lifts independently for full engine access, or a newer fiberglass tilt hood. Some configurations even share a cab design with Mack's own RS series trucks. Under the surface, it's a genuine leap forward in engineering. It should be a triumphant new chapter. Instead, it arrives at the worst possible moment, that same year. A new federal safety regulation, FMVSS 121, mandates anti-lock brakes on heavy trucks across the entire industry. For a manufacturing giant, absorbing that cost is a rounding error. For a company hand-building maybe 350 trucks a year, it's a serious financial blow, hitting margins that were never fat to begin with, at almost exactly the same time. The United States slides into the brutal 1974-75 recession. Orders slow down. Cash gets tighter. Every small manufacturer in America is suddenly fighting for survival at once. In 1975, in the middle of all this pressure, Brockway lands one of the biggest single orders in its history, 361 trucks bound for Iran. It's nearly the company's entire production output for the year, riding on one overseas contract. In the moment, it feels like a lifeline. Looking back, it's something closer to a warning sign, a small, proud manufacturer now, so dependent on a handful of massive orders that losing even one of them could be enough to sink the whole operation. And underneath all of it, tension is quietly building on the factory floor in Cortland. Wages, working conditions, job security, in an era when factory workers all across industrial America are watching plants shut down around them, city after city, one blue-collar town at a time. In 1976, that tension finally boils over into a strike. It gets resolved for now, but it's a preview of what's coming. And almost nobody in Cortland realizes just how little time is actually left. January 1977, members of United Auto Workers Local 68, the union representing Brockway's Cortland workforce, stage a wildcat strike, no formal vote, no warning to management. Workers simply walk off the line. Negotiations begin. A new labor contract gets put on the table. It falls apart. On February 8, 1977, the workers walk out again. This time, it isn't temporary, it's a full strike. And for the first time in 65 years, the Cortland plant goes completely silent. For a moment, there's a flicker of hope. A businessman named Romer reportedly steps forward, interested in restarting Brockway production, possibly even buying the struggling division outright and running it independently of Mack. He sets a target: bring the plant back online by June 1, 1977. It's close, it's almost there. But when Romer puts a new labor agreement in front of the union, they reject it. The deal collapses, and Mack Trucks, the parent company, already absorbing financial losses of its own during a brutal industry-wide downturn, makes the final call. They are not going to keep pouring resources into a division that keeps shutting itself down every time a contract negotiation goes sideways. The Cortland plant, which had built trucks continuously since 1912, permanently closes. When asked why, Mack's official explanation is short and blunt: union troubles. 2 words. Closing the book on 65 years of manufacturing history, but the story doesn't actually end cleanly with a locked factory gate. There's still unfinished business. Literally, sitting on the Cortland production floor when the strike hits are the last remaining, unfinished Brockway trucks, bodies without final assembly, engines without paperwork. Promises made to customers who are still expecting delivery. Instead of scrapping them, the company ships the parts nearly 1,200 miles, first to a Brockway dealership branch in Elmira, New York, and then, remarkably, all the way down to a rented warehouse in Miami, Florida. Why Miami? Because there's an order that has to be honored. 45 Brockway tractors promised to a company called Inter-American Transport, destined to haul sugar cane across Iran. A contract like that doesn't just get walked away from, so a small crew of former Brockway managers and supervisors, men who just weeks earlier were running a fully operational factory, employing hundreds of people, spend months in that Miami warehouse, hand-assembling the very last trucks the company will ever produce, piece by piece, far away from the town, and the workers that actually built the brand's reputation. On June 8, 1977, the final Brockway ever built rolls off that improvised, makeshift assembly line. No ribbon cutting, no press release, no parade through Cortland's Main Street the way there might have been 20 years earlier. Just a handful of exhausted men finishing a job in a rented Florida warehouse, closing out a story that started 65 years earlier in a small New York carriage shop back in Cortland itself. The closure isn't just the end of a company, it's the end of an identity. for 2 generations. This town had built its sense of self around the trucks rolling out of that plant. Researchers studying the period would later describe what happened in Cortland as part of a much larger, much sadder pattern sweeping across industrial America throughout the 1970s. Plants closing, downtowns hollowing out, skilled workers scattering to find whatever jobs were left in a changing economy. Cortland became one more entry on a painfully long national list, and strangely, Brockway's fading fortunes even made it onto the big screen. In 1978, just months after the Cortland plant went permanently dark, the trucking film Convoy began filming, and a battered old Brockway truck appears on screen in a memorable scene. During filming, the truck genuinely rolls over while making a hard turn. It wasn't scripted that way, but it looked so real, so fitting, that the director kept the moment in the final cut. To anyone who actually knew the brand's story, it plays almost like an accidental metaphor rolling right there on film, a rugged old truck tipping over at almost the exact same time the real company did. And yet Brockway didn't disappear completely. Not really. Every August, decades later, the town of Cortland still holds an annual Brockway Truck Show. Collectors drive in from across the entire country, towing beautifully restored Huskies, Husketeers, and 700 series trucks back to the exact town where they were originally built, polishing chrome dogs that have never rusted out of memory. Even though the factory that made them has been gone for close to 50 years, there's long been talk of turning that memory into something permanent, a dedicated museum, a physical home for what's left. Enthusiasts still track down and painstakingly restore every surviving Brockway they can find, treating each one less like an old machine and more like a fragile piece of American industrial history that refuses to be quietly forgotten. 65 years, from a horse-drawn carriage shop in a small New York town almost nobody outside it had heard of, to trucks grinding through blizzards with a golden husky proudly mounted on the hood, to an official title as the most rugged truck in the world, to a rented warehouse in Miami where the very last one was quietly bolted together by hand, far from home. Brockway was never the biggest name in American trucking. It never held more than a sliver of the market, even at its absolute peak. But for 65 years, it built something that genuinely mattered to the people who drove it through the worst winters this country has to offer, to the small town that staked its identity on it, and even now, to the collectors who still refuse to let it quietly rust away into forgotten history. The factory is gone. The company is gone. The last truck rolled off an improvised line in a rented Florida warehouse headed for a country most of the men who built it would never visit. But somewhere right now in a garage or a barn or a truck show parking lot in upstate New York, a chrome husky is still catching the light.